Hey everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and I teach watercolor, and today we are doing apple study.
Oh, Sir Isaac Newton.
Yes, we have Keenan here who's working the camera.
Hello.
And we will be doing this project in 7 steps. So our very first step is we're actually going to sketch this. We do not have an outline for this project, but I will show you how to draw this. It might seem scary. You guys can do it. Step 2, we're going to do our yellow underpainting. Step 3, we're going to put in our shadow on our apple. Step 4, we are going to do our red wash. Step 5, we're going to do the shadow on our apple. Step 6, we're going to do our stem. And I always put step 7 as details. That's just, well, I guess I shouldn't say always, but most of the time I like to leave myself a little bit of space in case I need to adjust anything.
Whenever you get to step number 7, we need to do some details.
Yes. And, sorry, let me get a paper for my swatches. Okay. We are using 4 colors in this project. So our very first color is red. Our second color is deep yellow. Our third color is emerald green. And our fourth color is berry blue. There's a little bit of thickness to it, so I'm going to water that down. Okay, berry blue. All right, we're using 2 paintbrushes, around 6 and around 2. These are our go-to brushes. I'm using LMA watercolor paper, which is a wood pulp paper. Please make sure you tape it down so it doesn't warp while you're painting. I use Holbein soft tape. It's my favorite painter's tape. And I have a pencil because we're gonna do some sketching.
Nice pencil.
Thank you. It's big.
It is.
All right, so let's do our oath and then get into it. So if you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
I promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
Thank you. Now, this is our creative challenge within our Crisp and Cozy box. And the reason why I wanted to bring attention to this project is because if you've watched previous tutorials, I talk about value, and I talk about how value has to do with the lightness and darkness of a color, and you can adjust the value by that lightness and darkness scale. There's also the other side of it, which you adjust value by hue, which is you use other colors to actually create the value changes than just adding water and lightening that color. And that's what we're doing in this project. So if you look at this closely, our highlight is actually a yellow, and then it goes to red, which is our medium value, and our shadow, let me put this up so it's not, there we go. Our shadow here is actually a purple. So we're not using just one color here and adjusting the value, which you can do, that would create form. But when you allow yourself to use different hues to complement the value changes, it feels richer and it feels fuller, okay?
Okay.
Also, we're gonna be doing some sketching here. And I felt like an apple was a good place to start. If you guys want to improve your techniques with watercolor, then doing still lives is a great way to learn a lot of different things. And a still life is essentially something not moving. You set up fruit or jars.
Napping.
Person napping. Someone who's not going to move, mess with the light, and then like draw it or paint it. I mean, that's really what I did for years and years and years in art school.
You painted napping people?
Yeah, sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, because we would have models.
That's amazing.
Okay, so we got a pencil and we're gonna do our sketch. Now you guys can decide how big you want this to be. And if painting is kind of intimidating to you or painting large is intimidating to you, you're always welcome to cut your paper in half and just work on a smaller scale. I'm gonna start by just doing kind of like a circle, okay, for my apple. And this will help me get the overall size of what I want my apple to be. When you paint circles and when you're just starting to put in your subject, I want you guys to notice that I'm using mostly my elbow and my shoulder to create this movement. I'm not using my wrist. I'm kind of like doing this. And my art teacher told me, and I haven't really tested it, I just believe what he said, but like when you use more like your arm and your shoulder to do basic shapes, you're more accurate in that circle shape than if you were to use your wrist. So when I'm starting to sketch out, when I'm just trying to get a general idea of something and I'm just going for a rough, I'm using my shoulder, just getting the basic shape. And then from here I can decide, do I want this apple to be bigger or smaller? I feel actually really good about this size. I'm about 1.5 inches off the bottom. That leaves plenty of room for my shadow. And I have probably about 3 inches from the top, so that feels pretty good to me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of tighten my apple shape a little bit more, try and make it more accurate. So I started with a rough circle, and this is the beautiful, beautiful thing about drawing and sketching, especially natural things in the world, is there are apples that are perfectly round. There are apples that are squatty. There are apples that are super wonky and have like a really tall side and a short side. There's some that have like a really defined bottom. So I don't want you to get too caught up on the actual apple shape, because in nature somewhere it exists. I really just want you to kind of pay attention to more the form instead of the overall shape. So the three-dimensionality of the apple and what it will become instead of just the outline of it, okay? But if we're focusing on the shape right now, so I'm gonna keep the top rounded, but I'm gonna kind of shorten that round a little bit more. I'm gonna bring it in, and then I want the top of my apple to be the roundest part, and then it's gonna go in, okay? And then I'm gonna have a little bump, and another little bump, and complete that, okay?
Nice.
So it's really just starting with the circle and kind of just bringing in the bottom, doing a little bump. And then at the top here, I want to put in my stem. So you guys know that apples kind of go in where that stem goes in, right? And we're not looking at it overhead. This apple is kind of turned away from us. If we were looking at it overhead, then our apple would probably be mostly round and that stem would be right in the center. But because we're taking that apple and moving it onto its side, we're seeing mostly the front of the apple, the little bit of the top back, and then this stem is going to come out with a little bit of a lip. Okay? Now you want to make sure that your stem is actually going to be taller than the back of your apple. And that's just going to add to our us trying to convince our viewer that this is a three-dimensional form. And it's much easier to do that if things don't line up perfectly. Where like if I'm just like, yeah, this stem goes out taller than the apple, then it's easier in our brains to be like, okay, that's a separate plane coming off of this form. Where if it were to line up evenly, all of a sudden you're like, is that a separate plane that comes off of that form? What is that?
Interesting.
So pay attention to where your lines and shapes meet. You usually very rarely never want them to be on the same exact line as your shape. There's a word for that. I can't remember what it's called. But like if I were to paint a background in here, like if it was like tables and chairs and stuff, I wouldn't want to do the edge of the table to line up with the edge of that apple. That would mess with my depth.
Like an illusion.
Yeah, it would not do what we want to do, which is convince people that these are three-dimensional things on a two-dimensional surface. Okay, now before we get into painting, I want to call attention to where we're going to put in our highlights and our shadows. So my highlight is going to come from my left-hand side here, so the light source is coming that way. That means around right here is going to be my highlight. So I'm just going to circle that off, okay? And that also means that my apple is turning away. So around this area is going to be my shadow. This is where it's going to be darkest on my apple. Now if you notice here, it kind of lightens up in this area right here, and you might be like, why is that lightening up in this area? Well, the light that's hitting on the table in the back, this form keeps on going, right? So there's a light coming this way. It's also hitting this back table, which is also casting light on that back edge of that apple. Not enough to wash it out, but enough to say like there's still light going on around this apple. So we have our highlight, we have our shadow, and then there's this, just that little section that we're gonna kind of keep more medium value, light value. And I'm not gonna put in my shadow here, you're welcome to, but I'm just kind of having it angle this way. If you want to draw it in, you can. I don't really feel like I need to. Okay, so this is where if you want to make any last minute adjustments before you start painting, you can. I'm going to erase some of these sketch marks. And remember, watercolors are transparent, so whatever, you might be able to see some of these pencil lines through it. So if you want to lighten them up, you can.
Would you have an apple with a wormhole in it?
Oh yeah.
That'd be pretty neat.
Kind of gross. Perfect for Halloween.
Totally.
I don't get like personally offended when there's pencil marks on paintings. I really don't. I feel like it just adds. Okay. All right, that's step one. Now we're ready to paint. So we're gonna start by doing a yellow underpainting. So I'm gonna get my 6 wet. Sorry, I'm just lightening up where my highlights are. I'm gonna get my 6 wet. I'm gonna take deep yellow, add some water to it so it's a light value. And I'm gonna paint. Now I am gonna leave like a white spot right on that highlighted area, right in the middle. I'm just gonna do yellow, light yellow, first layer, underpainting, that kind of thing. And I'm working fairly quickly here.
There are yellow apples too.
Yeah. Drop in a little bit more. So what we're going to do here to like really convince our viewer of this value change is our highlighted is going to be like white or a very, very light yellow, and then it's going to go to a richer yellow, and then an orange, and then a red, and then a purple. Okay? So I'm just kind of setting myself up for that color change. Okay. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in our shadow while we let this dry. So I'm going to take my round 6, I'm going to take my berry blue, oops, and then right off the right hand side here, let's add a little bit of red in there so it has kind of like a magenta feel, just a little. So on the right hand side, I'm going to put in, I don't want it to touch, and you can see I left a little bit of space there. I don't want it to touch because then that color will blend into my apple, and I don't want it to. So my darkest value is going to be right underneath, and then I'm just going to use water to spread. And I want the value to lighten the further I go out. So when we get to the edge of the shadow here, I want a barely there color.
I love that it's a purple.
I feel like a little purple tone to that blue would be really nice.
Yeah.
And then let the shadow, if you see here, the shadow kind of comes up around the apple. It doesn't just stay in that line at the bottom. And if you have to do one more little, while it's still wet, sometimes what I like to do is right at that tip where it's supposed to be like the strongest of the shadow, like right underneath. I'll just drop some color in there. Just make sure it's nice and strong. Okay, that feels pretty good. All right, now we are going to move to step 4. We're going to start with our red wash. So I'm going to take red and add some water to it and start painting red on my apple. Now when I get close to my highlight, I'm going to thin out my red, so then you can see more of that yellow underneath, and it looks a little bit more like an orange than pure red. And that's mostly around the highlighted area. Now when I get more towards the front of this apple, that's when I'm going to really want to drop in that pure red color.
Whoa.
I'm going to try and avoid my shadow. Now another thing that you can do to kind of really help this value change by hue is you can even mix together off to the side some deep yellow and some red to get an orange. And kind of right here you can put that in there by the highlight. And I like working pretty quickly on this part because that red is just going to disperse onto this apple. And you can get some really beautiful color and texture.
I love watching apples be drawn or painted.
Why?
I don't know.
Just something about them.
They're just so... It's such a simple thing because it's an apple.
Mm-hmm.
But for me and my skill level, because I recently started to just try and sketch apples.
Mm-hmm.
And I got one looking okay.
Yeah.
But it is not an easy task to get the form
Yeah.
that you're talking about.
That three-dimensionality, because
Yeah.
that all depends on the values, that all
Right.
depends on the lightness and darkness that you have going, the range. And I'm kind of painting over my stem here because I'm going to make that brown anyway. I'm leaving some space for this highlight on this back. And what we can see here, and I just want to call attention to this, is where I put my highlight here and left it white, it now feels a little bit blocky, which isn't bad because sometimes when you have direct light on something and it has a glare, it is blocky. It's like a chunk of white. So you can leave that and be like, yeah, this is a direct, strong light. Or if you want to kind of soften it out a little bit, you can just kind of blend around it like so. So it doesn't feel so abrupt. But I'm still really utilizing that yellow, that orange to do that value change for me. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my red and I'm going to mix it with my berry blue to get like a dark purple, and maybe even a tiny bit of green to desaturate it. Not a lot, just a little bit. Can you, I don't know if they can see that.
Yes, here you go.
So now I kind of have like this magenta color. So using this color, I'm going to go and put in on the right hand side this dark value. While I'm doing this while this is all still wet. This is all kind of wet on wet technique. And then we're going to kind of like blend this out so it doesn't feel like all of a sudden shadow. You know what I mean? Like the abilities to have your transitions be smooth in terms of value and color is how you can really add and make it feel more realistic and not kind of like a coloring book or something.
That makes sense, because when I draw the apple with a pencil, I always start, initially I started real heavy, but then I couldn't blend it right to where it didn't look smooth.
Yeah.
It was aggressive.
So you just gotta like, see, I'm lifting a little bit of that color out on the top here.
Yeah.
And then like on this left backhand side, there's gonna be a little bit more of that shadow coming in back here. I'm right on this top part, this kind of lip before it goes in. Now it's funny because as I'm painting this, my apple is kind of taking different shapes. I'm kind of adjusting the edges as I go. So you're always allowed to adjust edges as you go. So like even right now I'm reshaping this. Why? I just feel like I wanted the top to be a little bit rounder. That's it. But like if you feel good about your shape that you have for your apple, then you don't need to do that. It just is like sometimes when we get to painting, I'll make a mark that goes outside the form a little bit, so I'll just adjust the edge.
I like that you did this shadow already, because it gives it like it's almost like a motivator to like finish the apple.
Yeah. Shadows are interesting because even if like the apple isn't finished, it has a sense of dimension. Like it feels like it's already complete just because it's casting a shadow, which I think is super interesting.
So interesting.
Now my apple here is getting kind of wide, looking at it compared to my reference photo. I'm okay with that though.
Yeah.
I just want to call attention to it. And this is where I'm kind of just like making sure the transitions feel good. Putting in more red where I want it to smooth out a little bit better.
It's a good looking apple.
It's kind of funny too, because like the thing that I'm noticing is my highlight, because I changed the edge of my apple. My highlight on this is really close to the edge, but now my highlight is not so close anymore because I like thickened it, which I don't think is a huge deal, but I just want to call attention to it where it's just like, okay, so changing that edge will adjust where you put in that highlight. It's not a big deal. But I still feel like, I don't know, I feel like that one highlight spot is still too light. I'm thinking about blending it out. What do you think, Keenan?
I would say blend it out, because of the direction the shadow is going with where that highlight is located on the apple.
Okay, so I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to blend.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
That looks great.
There we go. That looks good.
That looks awesome.
Okay, but one thing I'm noticing before I do my stem is, and I know that I've said this before, but values inform each other. So when I first put in that shadow, that dark value felt good. But now that I have such dark values on my apple, the darkest value on my shadow is not matching with the darkest value on my apple. So when you do different areas of a painting and you're playing with values, you want to make sure that the values relate to each other on the different areas. So I'm going to go in and create like even a darker, like blue, red, purple thing. And at this point, I'm just mixing all my colors together to get a nice dark value. And see, they've bled in and touched to each other, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think it looks cool.
And I'm going to put in that dark value there and then blend it out. And that's because I want these values to relate to each other. Now this color is more of a gray color that I'm putting out. So I feel like I still have some of my blue underneath. Now doesn't that value match it a little bit better, don't you think?
So much better.
Yeah.
That's crazy. There's less purple for sure.
And if you want to like keep that purple if you miss it, like especially in the lighter value areas, you can try and put it back in too. Like let's put a little pink in there.
Cool.
That feels better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I'm going to mix a color for my stem as I'm painting blue on my shadow. I just missed it. I missed the blue. I'm going to put it back. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to switch to my 2, and this is where I'm going to utilize the green because I want to create a brown. So I have green, I have my red. I'm going to put a little bit of berry blue in there. Get this dark brown. Now admittedly, I didn't go too crazy on the dimensions of the stem itself, but just so you guys know, when you're doing photorealism, when you're doing like trying to pay attention to the form, every part has a form. Like even a tiny little 1-inch stem is 3-dimensional. And to make something 3-dimensional, it needs to have different values. Now, I kind of just went with one value on this just to show that there is a stem, but if you were better than me, then you would take the time to look at where is that light hitting that stem? Where are there different values on that little stem? And just paying attention to those small changes is what elevates your work. So, let's see if this is dry. Yeah. Putting in my stem. The top is a little bit wider than where it goes out. Like that.
That is wild.
Our little apple study.
The apple study, but the stem even changed more of the apple's look.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gross.
Isn't that fun?
Yes. I just love it.
I love it too. I really do love it too. I'm going to go in Do this because that red bled a little too much into my shadow. There we go. That feels better. There's our apple, you guys.
Wow.
We painted an apple. You drew it, you painted it, and you might be looking at this being like, because this is how I'm feeling. And the only reason why I feel kind of good right now is I could actually see on a screen far away the overhead camera, so I have a better sense of what this looks like. You might be looking at this and thinking, there is no way this looks like an apple. Step back from your painting, walk away from your painting, and come back to it. Look at it from far away across the room. Like, I feel good about how my apple looks right now because I can see it on the screen.
So get a studio.
So get a camera.
Several cameras.
Set it up. But all of that is to say, do not make a decision about a painting until you've given yourself space away from that painting. And if you're feeling frustrated, if you're reworking the same areas, if you want to give up on something before it's over, the best thing that you can do for yourself is give yourself space from your painting. So go for a walk, go get a snack, come back to it, look at it from far away. But we did an apple. And we did it by adjusting our hues as well as our values. So then when you're painting your own work and you're seeing these value changes within form on whatever it is, think of how can I incorporate hues into this so I can still communicate form, but there's a richness and a depth there, because that's what it does, man. It just makes it feel full and vibrant, you know? So this was our creative challenge. I know that this one was probably a little bit more intense than our last creative challenge.
It was.
Our peaceful patterns.
I also love the red. I
Yeah.
tried to say that. It's just so bright.
It's so bright. And I'm getting these gorgeous textures and blooms on here. Like, and I'm celebrating them. I'm loving them. Like, this is the joy of watercolor. So if you're on Instagram, you can tag us at Let's Go Make Art. If you're on Facebook, you can join our Facebook watercolor community. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. Can't wait to see how you guys do with this. I can't wait to see, like, maybe you'll set up your own still lives, and maybe you'll do something else besides an apple, you know, like play with it. But the biggest thing is to remember to have fun, to push yourself, to try new things, and to learn from whatever it is that you do, whether it's successful or not. So thank you for painting with me. If you need any of this stuff, you can find it at letsmakeart.com. And Keenan, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.